Good morning, everybody. So as we know, we've been focusing on food, nyoho teachings around food. We kind of came up with 5 areas that we can talk about related to food. Ingredients, we heard from Sawyer about ingredients, cooking, serving, eating, and cleaning up. So today we are at eating, the practice of eating. So let's take up that. We don't usually take eating as a practice, perhaps, until we get to a retreat or we get to a sesshin, and then suddenly eating is a formal thing. There's a way to do everything: set out your bowls, receive your food, eat your food, clean your bowls. Up until that time, we might just think, well, eating is a thing we do every day, right? And suddenly, it's right in front of us. So if you're the self-conscious type who fears being incompetent in public, sometimes the ritual around eating may be enough to sort of put you off doing sesshin. I've met plenty of people who say, I would do that sesshin, except I'm scared of the meals, or I'm worried about the ritual that goes with the meals. So let me just say right off the top here, that is your ego getting in the way. The way to overcome that, of course, is to plunge in and actually do things. Sign up for that retreat, muddle your way through that meal, learn to do things, of course, is the way we put ego over here. It can be very difficult for us to be incompetent in public. I have a temperament that makes it very difficult for me to be incompetent in public. But simply plunging in and doing the practice is the way we learn, right? That immersion is the way we learn. So on the one hand, there's a lot we can learn from considering eating as a practice, in addition to just being a daily thing we do. On the other hand, we need to not get precious about it and gee whiz about it and make it into a magical thing, which is true of all the rest of our practice, right? That too is only our ego, our need to create some special experience for ourselves to make eating very exciting or very magical or very important or something, right? That's a fabrication from us. So when we consider the practice of eating, we need, I think, also to consider the nature of hunger. What is it that's driving us to eat things? So there's physiological hunger. Our bodies need food. Our bodies need nutrition in order to function and for us to survive. And there's psychological or emotional hunger, right, which we may try to satisfy with food or with other things related to eating, consuming, right? So we can ask ourselves which kind of hunger we're dealing with when we sit down to a meal, whether that's at home or at the retreat. During sesshin, we really become very intimate with what's going on in our minds. It's a chance for us to look at hunger. What is driving me to eat? So eating seems like a simple everyday act, but of course it's tied up with a lot of other things like memory and like interpersonal relationships. Eating is often a social event. It's an excuse to get people together, or it's something we do as a part of a social experience. Eating can become an adjunct to other kinds of activities as a way to promote fellowship, which is wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. We may eat things in order to make others happy. How many of us have done that? If we eat what somebody made, we are validating that person. We're validating our relationship with them. We're saying, yes, you're important to me. Thank you for what you're doing. Expressing gratitude is a wonderful thing, and also there's many, many permutations of that. So we can be acknowledging that people are good cooks or people are good providers, and eating can look like an act of love. So there are other things happening in addition to the simple act of eating. On our own part, of course, we can be hungry for the comfort, the inclusion that goes with eating, even if we're living alone, right? You make a batch of mom's famous cookies and somehow mom is in the kitchen with you. Guilty. My mom had a wonderful sugar cookie recipe, and when I make that and I eat that, mom is in the room with me. So much tied up with eating. It's a very immediate source of things coming in the sense gates, right? So as a tenzo, I learned long ago, eating is really closely tied to morale. During sesshin, where we're already pushing ourselves a bit, we don't have a lot of stimulation. We're sitting all day long looking at a wall in a room which doesn't have a lot of things going on. Looking forward to that meal can become a thing. Suddenly now there's stimulation, there's movement, there's something going on. So at a time when we're pushing ourselves a bit, both physically and spiritually, that meal becomes kind of a welcome distraction. It can be a way we're marking time. Oh, there's 2 periods and then there's breakfast, and then there's 5 periods and then there's lunch, and 5 more and there's dinner, and 2 more and that's the end of the day. So it can be a means of marking time. So in the midst of this seemingly endless sea of 14 periods of Zazen, suddenly we get up and get on our feet and look at something different, and new information is coming in through the senses. So it can be a real comfort in that situation, I think, to know that the Tenzo has made food specifically to work in that situation. We know the Tenzo's looking out for us, right? The Tenzo's practice is to pay attention to those things, as we've heard. So it can be very comforting, actually, to hear a bit of noise in the kitchen and know, Tenzo's at work, making my next meal, looking out for me. So we know that meal will be easy to eat and easy to serve and easy to digest. It will have the 5 flavors and 6 tastes. We don't have to choose it for ourselves and go to the work of doing that. We don't have to cook it for ourselves. We just sit down and food is there and we get to eat, thanks to the Tenzo and the servers, as we heard last time. So now, just eating, well, there's a real practice. Just like all the just doing that we do in this practice, we hear all the time about just sitting, dropping off body and mind. In other words, not creating fabrications about who we are and what we're doing and what's happening around that. How about applying that same approach to just eating? How about eating a meal without creating the fabrications about what we're eating and who we are when we're eating and all the things that can surround that? So that might sound like we're not allowed to enjoy the meal or appreciate the ingredients or appreciate what the cook has done, and that's not it. That's not it at all. We can absolutely enjoy the meal and be grateful for it and appreciate all the things about it and still not write a story that creates attachment. So now we're back to nyoho, right? Things that we do or make or encounter in accord with the dharma, and that central question, does this thing cause clinging or attachment? Sometimes that's about the thing, and sometimes that's about our approach to the thing or our accepting, encountering whatever it is. So of course, one other important aspect of nyoho is ryo, or amount. How much are we eating? Is it the appropriate amount? So the Tenzo's thinking about this, how much are we cooking, how much are we serving, and then we're thinking about it as practitioners who are being supported by that, how much are we eating? So when folks are just learning how to participate in these formal meals, I've noticed they sometimes take very little food. They're worried about the mechanics of how they're going to receive it, what they're going to do with it. They're worried they won't finish it in time with everyone else, and they'll be the last one at the table, still frantically trying to get food out of their bowls. Everyone's waiting for me, right? I'm feeling uncomfortable. That is a really understandable human coping mechanism, right? I mean, I have all the sympathy and empathy in the world for that. I've also noticed that when people get over the mechanics of dealing with oryoki, then they start eating more. Then they're comfortable. Then they're realizing hunger. I need to eat enough to go back onto that cushion, right, and sit for the next block of periods. So, of course, it's also possible to eat too much as a means of distracting ourselves from whatever is coming up in Zazen or outside of a retreat, whatever is coming up in our lives, right? We can eat because it keeps our mind off of things that we like to separate ourselves from. We're not actually separated and yet. Doing something else for the moment can feel like a cushion, right? Like a buffer zone. So, we get to watch ourselves perhaps eat too much at mealtime and then try to stay awake on the cushion for the next period, right? You've eaten too much rice, too much pasta, and then you try to stay awake on the cushion. So we get to see the results of that. So there are many, many stories of folks in this tradition, both in North America and before North America, trying to manage amount that they're receiving or that they're eating at the meal. We hear stories about people receiving their food during sesshin, here, mostly North America, I'm hearing this, quickly trying everything to decide which one they want more of, and then very quickly making sure they empty that bowl so that when seconds come around, they get more of that thing, right? It's a trick we play. So this sort of thing is not a new problem. If you look way back in the earliest rules for the Buddhist Sangha, there are instructions about not hiding bean curry under your rice so that when the seconds come around, you can get more bean curry, right? Apparently human beings have been doing this for a long time, even within Sanghas and even within formal practice. So there's no question that the amount we eat overall in North America is a national issue and something we get to pay attention to. More than 4 out of 10 adults in the US are considered obese today, 20% of children and adolescents. So clearly there is something we can learn about ryo, about amount. Sesshin gives us the chance to do that, but it's not our only chance to do that. So one thing that can happen when we start to practice is we notice our craving and aversion and what's driving that, right? When we're sitting and eating a meal and there is not the distraction of chitty-chatting with family and friends and just, whatever is going on around the meal, when our focus is simply to sit down and eat the meal, we can really become intimate with ourselves and watch how craving and aversion comes up. I like this, I don't like that, I want more of that thing. Oh, I hope there's some of that one left, right? We really get to see that happening. So during Sesshin we get to pay attention to how much do we really need to eat in order to carry out our daily practice. And we'll notice sometimes we want less than usual because we're not perhaps doing active heavy work, we're simply sitting on the cushion. Sometimes we want more because we're actually working hard on the cushion in a certain way. We get to really become intimate with that. What we need to eat might be more or less than we might think. So without the ability to get up and distract ourselves during Sesshin by eating snacks whenever we want, getting a cup of tea and another piece of cake, we get to see how our impulse toward unnecessary eating arises. Because we know we make a commitment to sit on the cushion, we're going to sit there for those 50 minutes. We're not going to get up, especially in a room full of other people, right? We're not going to get up and decide I'm bored with this or I'm uncomfortable with what's coming up. I'm going to go, make popcorn or get a soda or a cup of tea. So I've also noticed that because Sesshin meals are very intentionally and very carefully balanced for those 5 flavors and 6 tastes and how they're prepared, they are satisfying. They feel satisfying. I knew I was onto something as a Tenzo many years ago when back in Minnesota, when one of the participants in the Sesshin said to me, I am not going home at night, every night after Sesshin, and eating a big snack. And this was typically what he'd been doing. So there was something about the way we now understood how do we construct a meal, how do we serve a meal, how do we make sure that that's balanced and satisfying and appropriate for Zazen. That meant this guy was not going home and making a big sandwich. I thought, that's really interesting. This feels like now we're supporting practice. We're not simply making food to feed the Tenzo's ego or something, right? Now we're actually thinking about eating as a practice. So the harmony in eating that starts with those 5 colors and 6 tastes continues in our deportment at mealtime, how we carry ourselves. After all, Dogen says the virtue of peace and harmony is the absolute Sangha treasure. So there's something about harmony going on there during eating, which is important. Eating with some awareness of our effect on others in the immediate vicinity is a really good practice, especially if we live alone. My cats don't care what I do. If I come here and I sit Sesshin, now I'm surrounded by people and I need to have some awareness and pay some attention to the effect of what I'm doing on other people. So those very early rules I mentioned for the Sangha before include things like not chewing with your mouth open and not scattering your food all around and not wolfing down huge mouthfuls, right? And, I read these things and I just have to wonder, did these folks have no home training? I mean, come on. So I was a bit surprised that somebody actually had to tell people that. But, just for context, those rules applied originally not only to eating within the context of the Sangha, but also being served and hosted by lay people when you went out for alms rounds. So clearly, part of this was designed not to embarrass the Sangha. Don't go out there and, just sort of be a bull in a china shop. If a layperson is supporting you and providing a meal for you, please have some respect. Please take care of your deportment around that. Anyway, I think it's a really interesting insight into the early Sangha and what we had to tell these young people. So those rules have come down to us from the Vinaya through Chinese texts to Japanese texts to Dogen, who quotes them. So if we read the Eihei Shingi and we read his writings about food, eating and serving and all of that, we can see those threads are still there. In some cases, he actually has to quote these things directly. So even now there are expectations built into our formal meals about eating in a way that demonstrates some courtesy. to the other people around us. There are guidelines about not elbowing each other when we're sitting very close together, and we know we sit around this table, sometimes we're a bit close. There's rules about not elbowing each other, not letting our okasas brush other people. When we eat, we sit up straight. We actually pick up our bowls. We're not bending over the table, right? We're going to pick up our things, sit straight, eat straight, right? Not leaning on our elbows, kind of slurping up our food. So we hold up that first bowl. The first bowl usually contains the rice. In the morning, it's the porridge, right? We hold up that bowl, and the way we use the spoon, with the handle this way, covers the mouth, right? The spoon covers the mouth when we open the mouth and put the food in, right? There's very subtle, very simple, but very subtle ways that we take care of other people. When we eat something that has a seed, you cover your mouth to take out that seed and put that in your bowl in a way that people can't see that. That's not a pretty thing. People don't want to see that. So there's manners around that. We eat as silently as possible, including crunchy food. Well, if you've ever been in a Senmon Soto eating pickles, we've heard from Dojo, and I remember those days. What a challenge that is. How do you eat crunchy pickles without making a lot of noise? So it's not only crunchy food, are we clattering our spoons and chopsticks on our bowls? Are we clattering the bowls with each other, right? We're going to eat all of that as silently as we can. And of course, we know from our talk about serving, simply trying to be silent is a wonderful practice. We have to pay attention. Somehow we're not naturally silent. So if we have to be silent, we're really paying attention to how are we handling those bowls. Which, by the way, we consider Buddha's body, right? That large bowl is Buddha's head, and the other bowls are his body, and the utensils are his arms and legs. And so how are we handling Buddha while we're eating? That's a really interesting practice. So not only do we do our best to respect the humans at the table, we also include the unseen beings who are present. We've invited them to the meal if we're doing the chanting. So during Sesshin, our meals are silent. We don't do the typical chanting. Outside of Sesshin, when we're doing oryoki breakfasts, we include all the chanting because we kind of need that context to understand why we're doing the motions that we're doing and to have the larger story. All of Buddha's teaching is in that meal chant. And if you look at Todo-san's book, Living by Vow, and you look at the meal chants, you'll see all of Buddha's teaching is there. So we do those chants to sort of orient ourselves to that. One of those chants is about inviting Buddhas and ancestors, right? So when we do that chant, there's a clap of the clappers between the names. There's 10 Buddha names, and we do it between each of the names. So if that clap comes too close to the beginning of the line, we've knocked that Buddha on his head. And if it comes too close to the end of the line, we've stepped on that Buddha's foot. And there's a very particular way, right, that we want to be careful about the unseen beings in the room. That's part of our deportment. So we invite those Buddhas and ancestors to the meal, and we feed them in two different ways. One is by offering a miniature meal on the altar. We don't do that here, but it's common practice, right? There's a little miniature tray, and it's all the exact same food that we're eating, and ideally it should be at the right temperature, like we're eating it, because we're offering this thing. You don't make it 2 hours ahead and let it sit and congeal, right? It should be fresh, and it should be hot, and just the way we're eating it. There's a bit of ceremony about how we would offer that to Manjushri in the Soto. And the other is that for lunch, before we start eating, we offer 7 grains of rice to hungry spirits, wishing for their liberation. So even the hungry spirits are in the room with us, right? Eating is a much bigger thing than it's just me and my sandwich, or it's just me and the people around the table. What about all the unseen beings that are also a part of this thing? So throughout the meal, we get to strike a balance between paying attention to our own eating, our own deportment, what's happening here in front of me, and being aware of what's happening around the table, and being aware of the beings that we can't even see. So, for instance, the doshi leading the meal stops eating. We all have to have one eye over there. As soon as the doshi stops eating, puts down bowls and utensils, we all stop eating because it's time for seconds. So no matter where we are in the meal, we all stop. Well, we have to know what's going on at the end of the table. And in a long line of people, somehow we still need that kind of awareness, right? So we put down everything. We don't start eating again until everybody has whatever seconds they want. We can look at how people have arranged their utensils to actually know who's getting up and getting seconds and who's going to stay put. There's a lot of things we can read about what's going on there. Sometimes folks get so engrossed in their own bowls and they're so concerned about their own mechanics that they don't notice that everyone around them has stopped. And you kind of have to go, do you see what's happening, right? So sometimes we have to help each other. So all those eating practices remind us we are not doing this eating thing alone. It's one of the reasons I think that meals are practice. We never want to forget that meals are practice. So in a retreat or in a sesshin or in a senman soto, you don't idly skip a meal. I don't feel like eating today. That would be like skipping zazen, because meals are practice. New jikidos want to put out the candle here during meals, and I go, no, it's practice, right? That stays going because eating is practice. So we get to directly experience Sangha as peace and harmony when we approach our eating like that, we approach our meals like that. But another reason I think that meals are practice is that we get to think about the sameness of food and dharma. So here we are again about the sameness of dharma and something. We talked a lot about that with regard to robes, right? Food and dharma, same kind of thing. Again, this puts us back into the realm of nyoho. When we're eating, we're being nourished by dharma, just as we are when we're doing dharma study, or we're doing hearing a talk, or doing liturgy. We're being nourished by dharma when we're eating a meal in that way. So Dogen says, just let dharma be the same as food, and let food be the same as dharma. For this reason, if dharmas are the dharma nature, then food is also the dharma nature. If the dharma is suchness, then food is also suchness. If the dharma is the single mind, food is also the single mind. If the dharma is bodhi, food is also bodhi. So food is awakening, right? He goes on to help us understand the nature of this sameness, which again we also understand from our study of nyoho this year. Again, nyo can mean something is like something, or something is consistent with something, but it can also mean it's completely the same as something. So nyoho, we're doing something in accord with the dharma, we're doing something to fit in with the dharma, and also whatever this thing is completely the same as dharma. So Dogen says, this same is not the sameness of parity or equality, but the sameness of awakening to the true sameness, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Awakening to the true sameness is the ultimate identity of all the suchnesses from beginning to end. The suchness of the ultimate identity from beginning to end is the genuine form of all dharmas, which only a Buddha together with a Buddha can exhaustively penetrate. So, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi is the awareness of a Buddha that allows for impartiality, right? Encountering all things equally. This awakening to true sameness comes from seeing all things as empty. So encountering the emptiness, all things as empty. So Dogen is saying it's not that food is like dharma, or food is the equivalent of suchness, but that they're actually the same. So food is not a metaphor or a symbol, and I think that's what we want to slip into. It's really easy for us to say, oh, these things are like something. This thing is an allegory for something. Dogen's saying, no, it is the same thing. Food is completely dharma. Robes are completely dharma, right? However, only a Buddha together with a Buddha can recognize it. So, of course, this is a famous Dogen phrase, right? He wrote a whole fast school, the Shobogenzo, on it. Yubutsu, Yobutsu, only Buddha together with Buddha. So this is a core teaching from Dogen, and it shows up right here in the meal. Again, meals are practice, right? So this is radical non-separation or non-duality. Within emptiness, all things are the same. If all conditioned things are without a fixed nature because causes and conditions are changing all the time, then what arises from causes and conditions has to also be changing, right? This is familiar territory for us. So nothing has a fixed essence, a fixed boundary that separates it from anything else or keeps it from ever changing, right? So we know this is basic stuff about impermanence and interdependence. So in this absolute view, all things are the same, not similar to, not like, not comparable to, not representing something else, entirely the same. This is the way Buddha sees. Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. So eating and using oryoki are the acts of a Buddha, so if we're all Buddhas, then we need to behave like Buddhas. So again, food is practice, meals, eating is practice. Eating is the act of a Buddha. When we consider eating in that way, it makes us think about it a little bit differently. So actually, we need to behave like Buddhas all the time. If we're practitioners and we're bodhisattvas, we need to behave like Buddhas all the time. Meals are one opportunity. Eating is one opportunity to do that, to behave like a Buddha. So if food is nothing other than dharma, because all things are nothing other than dharma, then the forms we use around meals are also nothing other than dharma. Now that's an interesting way to consider that, because I think we encounter meals and we can think, well, all that stuff, all that formality, all that ritual, all those forms are decoration. They're add-ons. They're something to make us see things differently, or something which is separate from the act of actually engaging in the meal, eating the meal. So consider that these are not add-ons or something extra in the meal process designed to produce a result called people eating and waking up. Carrying them out is the act of Buddha because it puts us in accord with dharma. And here's nyoho again, right? It is simply the dharma doing what it's doing. So like zazen, when we're eating these meals, we're sitting in one place. We're not moving around. We're doing something silently. We're not talking. We're paying attention, careful attention without getting precious. Careful attention to what we're doing. We're also continuing to open the hand of thought and drop off body and mind. We're noticing what's going on in this body and mind. We're letting go of craving and aversion and clinging and attachment. All that stuff that happens in our zazen needs to still be happening while we're eating, even though the body is moving and things are coming in through the sense gates. Like zazen, we're realizing the self without relation to others that includes everything. There's our favorite phrase here at Sanshin, right? Realizing the self without relation to others that includes everything. This is our whole practice. This is what we do here. No one can manage our deportment for us but us. No one's managing this body except ourselves. No one can eat for us. No one can carry out forms for us. We do these things for ourselves without relying on others. There can be a table of 25 people, and we're the only ones that can manage our own deportment. And of course, at the same time, we can't eat in complete isolation because this practice includes everything. So somebody grew the food, somebody cooked the food, somebody served the food. Causes and conditions were necessary to get that food into our bowls. We have systems of agriculture and transportation and commerce and all the things that go into making it possible to sit down and eat that meal. So we have our individual part to play. It's completely our responsibility with this karmic body and mind, right? We really need to pay attention to this set of 5 skandhas. And also, right, we're determining our own actions. We're carrying those things out for ourselves, but we do that in a way which is completely interpenetrated with this one unified reality. We are not sitting in a bubble, right? We are not cut off from anything at the same time that this karmic body is doing what it's doing. So like zazen, when we're engaged in something, we just do that. We're engaged in eating or cooking or serving. We just do that. So when we eat, we just eat. Nothing extra. Not attached to a particular outcome. We're not worried about our self-image. We're not concerned about trying to get more bean curry or whatever our favorite thing is that Esho and Sawyer have cooked today. We're not concerned about what comes next on the schedule or what we're going to do after we're done with sesshin. One of the beauties of the style of our sesshin that we do is that the next thing on the schedule is almost always zazen. We can let go of worrying about what the next thing is. So now all that's fine for when we're engaged in formal meals in the temple. That is not the way most of us eat most of the time. Almost everyone here has a home somewhere else. So this is not the way we eat on a day-to-day. So how do we practice with teachings about eating when we're at home by ourselves or with the family or out with our friends? So we might consider the Gokan no Ge, the 5 meal contemplation. So this is again something we chant during a formal meal, but we can consider these things outside of the formal meal. There's important teachings in here. So those things go. We reflect on the effort that brought us this food and consider how it comes to us. We reflect on our virtue in practice and whether we are worthy of this offering. We regard it as essential to free ourselves of excesses such as greed. We regard this food as good medicine to sustain our life, and for the sake of enlightenment, we now receive this food. So we reflect on the effort that brought us this food and consider how it comes to us. Well, this is a big reminder about interconnectedness, right? How we are supported by the entire universe all the time. We can't possibly do everything for ourselves. Even if we could grow all our own food and cook all our own food, we couldn't do that without sun and rain and seeds and soil, right? And things that are necessary for universal functioning. So we can't possibly do that entirely on our own. The reality is we never really live in isolation. It is not possible. We have to breathe air. We have to drink water. We have to eat food. Where does that come from? So when we do sesshin here, we make it a point to mention to everyone during the final wrap-up discussion and in the newsletter which local farms provided food for us. which local farms grow our food for that week, because Sawyer knows that, right? He's got relationships for us with these farms. So he gets a lot of things direct from farmers, and the Sangha grows some of the rest of it for ourselves. We have a garden, so we grow what we can for ourselves. And the effort being made on our behalf isn't just the farmers and truckers and grocers and cooks that contributed to that meal. It's the entirety and the energy of universal functioning. We're doing that within a much larger functioning, a much larger context. So Uchiyama Roshi would say, everything I encounter is my life. Or another way to say that is, we're living one life with all beings, which is a phrase I first heard in Minnesota, and it's still around. We're living one life with all beings. When we consider how our food comes to us and how we come to our food, that is a really big story. Because we can consider not only how did the food end up in my bowl, we can also consider how did I get to be sitting here eating it like this, whether that's in sesshin or at home with family. So at home, we can take a minute before we bite into the sandwich or, the first scoop of ice cream and think about where it came from and where we came from. Our own karmic circumstances are a part of this story. So it may be that that contemplation starts before we make the sandwich. Maybe it starts at the grocery store, or it starts when we get up in the morning. So that can be a very big practice, story in our practice. We reflect on our virtue and practice and whether we are worthy of this offering. So how are we using the energy of the food that we're eating? Are we using it to carry out the 3 pure precepts, doing what's wholesome, avoiding what's unwholesome, taking care of all beings? Is that where our energy is going? Coming from the food that we eat? Or are we using it to engage in 3 poisonous minds and to spill that suffering onto other beings and to be a little bit self-centered? How are we, some beings died so that we could eat them or eat parts of them, right? So how are we using those donated lives? Are we using them for good? Are we using them for wholesome things or not? So one way to reflect regularly is to participate in our monthly Ryakufussatsu, which as it happens is, I think, tomorrow evening. We hear the precepts read aloud. We consider how we're practicing with them, right? We take note of where we may have gone off the rails a little bit, make some commitment to ourselves to get back on track or to consider something in our lives. So anybody is welcome to attend. You don't have to have publicly taken precepts. You don't have to, have regularly been here for a year. Just show up, virtually or not. It's an interesting way to do these contemplations, bring ourselves back. We regard it as essential to free ourselves of excesses such as greed. So a different translation that I've heard more often is, we regard greed as the obstacle to freedom of mind. But in any event, here's one of those 3 poisonous minds. Here's greed, our old friend, right? What better opportunity to see how greed arises than mealtime? What is more immediate than taking in food? It's essential to free ourselves of the 3 poisons because these are the most basic delusions we have. All our other delusions are based on greed, anger, and ignorance. So, of course, it's essential to free ourselves from excesses such as greed. There might be 108 bonno, or seductive delusions, but they all come down to greed, anger, and ignorance. So eating is a basic function. Greed is a basic delusion. There's nothing too complicated about that, right? Those are really foundational things in our practice. So meals are one dharma gate for this. We can certainly also consider, where else in my life am I getting caught up in craving and aversion, and by extension, anger and ignorance? We regard this food as good medicine to sustain our life. So you may know traditionally, monks don't eat after the noon meal. So in the very early days, in the morning, they did the alms rounds, they'd come back and eat a noon meal, and after that, they didn't eat any more in the day. So traditionally, there's no dinner. So that carries over into our practice in the Sanbon Soto and in Sesshin today. The 3rd meal of the day is considered medicine rather than a meal. We need to eat in order to sustain the body, because the body is the ground of our practice. So that 3rd meal is about sustaining the body. It is not a big social event. It is not a meal about our grasping. It's considered medicine. So that dinner is often leftovers. There's a little less ceremony about it. If you look at the formal meals with all the bells and whistles, the most formal ceremonial meal is the first one, and there's a less at lunch, and there's less at dinner. So if you're in a place where you're actually doing the chanting for all the meals, there may be no chanting for dinner. It's clappers only. There are only 2 bowls rather than 3 or 5. So it becomes very simple. All that's to remind us we're eating, again, in order to simply take care of this body, this ground of our practice. We can certainly enjoy that food and appreciate that food, but again, without developing an attachment. I think it's kind of the opposite of North America, where dinner tends to be the big meal of the day, right? So we can flip that on its head a little bit. Lastly, for the sake of enlightenment, we now receive this food. So here's the conclusion of the whole thing about the practice of eating, right? We're eating in order to wake up and liberate all beings, and that includes this one. So there may be other reasons why we eat, for social reasons, for other reasons. We need to eat to take care of ourselves. But we never forget our bodhisattva vows, right, about liberating beings. Why are we doing all of this? It's to liberate beings. Ending delusion, taking up dharma gates, right, attaining the Buddha way. So what would you like to say today about the practice of eating, the things that go with eating, how eating can be a big old dharma gate for us? Things in this room to begin with? We eat 3 times a day, so we have lots of opportunity to consider.
Well, one of the things I've said time and time again is eating is a wonderful practice. And it's not just being, it's not being stuck in sesshin and suffering. My first session was like horrible. It was just an all-day sit. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get to lunch. I can't wait to get to lunch. Then I get to relax. And then I realized, oh, crap, I can't relax. And just for a first-time newbie, it was just overwhelming. But once you get used to it, it's a fun thing to, eating is a fun thing to incorporate into your practice, because it helps you learn how to not be greedy. It helps you learn to let go of your preferences. You know, the common thing of, oh, where do you want to go out to eat? I know where I want to go, but it's like, okay, we've got other people, let's be open to this. There is a Chinese restaurant in Champaign, and I thought they had the best opportunity for practice. When you go in, they have a folder, it's the American menu. But if you look up on the entire wall, it is the Chinese menu with numbers. And what I'm going to do it one of these days. I really do intend to do this, just to go up and say, that one.
Pick a number.
With the caveat that it's not a certain thing, you know, for allergies and et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, that's a good way to experience food. You also experience culture. I went, there was a Mexican restaurant, I took you there, their chicken's crack. It is, if any of you live near Bloomington, Illinois, there's a taqueria there called Veracruz, Taqueria Veracruz, and their chicken is like crack. It is just delicious. But there would be times I would go in there and say, okay, I know what I want to eat, but here's all this stuff on this menu that I have no idea what it is. And so I would just go, give me that and taco, right? And I discovered things like pupusas. Never had one before. It's a good way just to let go.
Well, there's so much about preference around eating, right? Because it's such an immediate sensory thing, right? So yes, and if we're sitting here during a retreat and we don't pick and choose and we're just eating what's in front of us, that can be tough for people if we're used to having control. We don't have control over that. You know, oh, there might be mushrooms in it, and maybe I don't like them. I personally love them, but you know, there might be something in there I don't like. Well, guess what? It's not going to hurt me. So opening the hand in that way can be very, very helpful. But I'll be interested on the day you come back and say, okay, I did it. I picked, you know, give me number 6, and it turned out to be fried chicken feet. When I was in China, I was served some very strange things.
Well, and the other thing about it too is it shows you where I've just totally lost what I was going to say.
We'll come back to you.
Okay.
When it resurfaces. Other folks in this room, things about eating, practice of eating, Please.
So I'm kind of wondering about, I've been wondering about this kind of this whole year, I think. Uh, like when we talk about things being the same as dharma, and we have the robe and the dharma is one, food is dharma. Um, when we say dharma in that case, is it inclusive of everything, or is it things in a certain way? Because if the robe, we say the robe is dharma, and we sew it in a very specific way, and we follow certain guidelines, and then so is our other clothing not the dharma, or if you do it in a different way, is it not dharma?
Right.
And then with food, I would say so. Like is an onion dharma? And one part of me would say, of course it is. But then it's also something about what particular circumstances is that onion arising, and so.
So I think we have to understand there's two ways to look at dharma. So there's dharma as universal functioning and everything is empty, and then there's dharma as teachings, which kind of point us toward that. What comes up for me when I hear that is we do things according to certain teachings, dharma, that point us to the much larger circumstance, which is everything I encounter as myself, big dharma. Yeah. So I think those two things are distinct but not separate. So this word ichinyo is really interesting. One sameness, one thusness. Everything we encounter is empty, therefore everything is the same. And at the same time, we need to know if somebody's allergic to peanuts, don't serve them that, right? Or, in our particular case, when we're doing sesshin food for oryoki, we don't use aromatics, right? So we leave out the onions and garlic and shallots and chives and what's the other one? Leeks, thank you. Right? So that's not to say those foods are bad or poisonous, and it's not that they are not dharma in the largest possible sense, but there are reasons we are cooking and serving and eating in a certain way in order to facilitate this practice of sitting looking at a wall 14 periods a day, so we leave those out for that reason. So I think we need to consider the two sides of one reality. Yeah. Which kind of dharma are we talking about at any given moment? So we have, it's the same way that that Sangha is the virtue of peace and harmony, even when it's not overtly harmonious. Somehow there's still peace and harmony in there, right? I think that's what you're pointing to.
Yeah,
that's
okay? Very helpful. And it reminds me of actually something Coleman said during the nyoho workshop. He actually described one way of looking at nyoho is its training wheels to lead you to this is the dharma as teachings in particular situations. We do things in certain ways. Yeah. And it's opening us to the dharma of all beings. And I think that's why we need to not get precious about it, so we can become very fixated on these are the rules for doing a formal meal, and we must always do it this way, and we can't ever modify. Maybe not. At the same time, we don't lose the spirit, but then at this last sesshin, we didn't have enough people to do all the forms we typically do, so we had to say, how do we keep that spirit and yet modify this so we can be practical and eat? And that felt successful because we understood the underlying teaching there, right? We were able to make a modification. If we had been unable to do that, we would have had 2 people serving and maybe 2 people at the table, and it wouldn't have been practical, right? So training wheels, I think, is an interesting way to think about that, right? How do we use those guidelines to point ourselves toward this larger thing? Because if we can only treat eating as practice when we're in a formal situation, then we can't ever take that out of the zendo. And I don't think that's the point, right? I think we need to be able to, everything I encounter is my life. So what happens when I go home and make a bowl of popcorn? Or I go home and make the lasagna, right? Well, how is that not, and it's full of onions and garlic and stuff, how is that not the same as dharma? That's just as empty as the bowl of vegetable soup I ate using my oryoki. Do I understand that in a really deep way? So the opportunity to do those meals during sesshin, as you know, this is a way to look at picking and choosing and preferences and control and amount and all that stuff. And then how do we not check that at the Zendo door? How do we take that, out into the world? So I've tried to be careful with every one of these talks to say, this is great, this is what happens in the formal practice in the temple. And then how about the rest of the other 95% of our lives when we're not sitting sesshin and we're not living in the temple? What good is this if we can't take it home? So how do we take what we've learned in the temple and help it, let it point us towards something larger? I think that's the point of all of it. Everything from Zazen on up, right? You have a follow-up or anything else there?
No, that's.
Thank you for raising that. I think that's important. Other things in the room? Folks at home, anything from you? Everyone wants to go eat lunch. Oh, I see a hand. Neil, please.
Yes, and thank you for the talk, Hoko, and I appreciated the comments early on, kind of drawing our attention to the ways in which, like, we might use food to kind of fill something that's empty in our lives, and like the comment on Rio and thinking about amount. But like, I also think about the challenge it can be when we kind of bring aversion to food and the ways in which I don't know, I think that just socially there's like a mixture of, think of like wellness, like equating that with like body image. And so I think of the ways in which one might, it might be easy to fall into a trap where, I feel like I'm aiming at the proper amount, but really that's because I'm worried about something that's beyond that. So your comment later about not being worried about self-image. And so I think about the practice of like really trying to do that and really noticing both the craving and aversion in eating.
Yep, so it's the same energy, it's two sides of the same energy, right? Craving and aversion. So yeah, there's no reference point for what does Ryo mean. How do we know what's enough? So in an oryoki bowl, what's enough, there's an amount. If we're home eating the lasagna, if I eat 3 pieces, is that right or wrong? Well, there's no kind of good way to know that. So we really have to be self-aware. And I thought it was important to bring up early on, there's so much more in the room when we're eating than just the eating. There's the memory, there's the self-image, there's the clinging, there's the relationships. Food is very complicated in that way. It's a social thing, which it can be complicated in that way. So it can be about body image, and it can also be about proficiency. If I eat a lot with my oryoki, it's because I'm really comfortable with it and I know what to do. If I eat as fast as possible, that's going to show what a great practitioner I am. There's just all of this stuff, right? So because we eat 3 times a day and because it's very immediate and on its surface very simple, it's a wonderful dharma gate. Like, what's coming up for me when I'm eating this? Yesterday I wasn't feeling very well, so I was eating a lot of things that weren't good for me. I knew. I was comforting myself. I was inspired by Esho's icebox cake, and I made some icebox cake, and I ate a whole lot of it yesterday. Which was not, I'm eating this and thinking, this tastes great, and this is so not good for me. And I knew what was going on, right? So we really get to look at all of those dynamics and what we attach to food. I think it's different in some ways from our other practices. Yeah, we have ideas about what Zazen is, and we have ideas about what ritual is, and how great, what wonderful scholars we are when we do our Dharma study, but there's something about the practice of eating, probably because we've been doing it since we were born. There's just something about that which is, there's a lot of stickiness in there for all the reasons that you're mentioning, yeah. Other things from people here or at home? Ado, please, good to see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this makes me think a little bit about some of my experience practicing in Japan, where the food was usually not very appealing to me, partly because it was of this nature, not seductive, but also the culture. The food, Japanese food does not appeal to me. So anyway, a lot of people lose weight, which I did. And anyway, my understanding of partly why that happened is because, well, I lost weight because I had weight to lose. I had excess weight. It wasn't that I was not getting enough food. I wasn't deprived. In fact, there's a tendency to stop eating when you're satisfied because it's not all that tempting to overeat. I mean, so, I mean, it was a great diet in that way. It actually did feel like medicine to me. And you only take as much as you need, and there's no desire for anything more.
That's interesting. When you remove that piece of temptation, how you regulate reality. I wish I'd had that problem. I lost weight in Japan too, but it was because the meals were low fat and relatively good for me, not because I didn't eat less. That morning okayu was real comfort food for me. I ate a lot. So that's interesting, isn't it, when we remove that whole layer of this food is, you know, if you were to choose your own food, you would choose something that you would naturally gravitate toward, and then you might eat too much of it. Whereas if you're not in control of that and what's put in front of you is simply wholesome, nutritious food, but not something that grabs you, it's so much easier to self-regulate, right? You get to see that whole layer in your mind about attachment. You know, I was really attached to that icebox cake for a lot of reasons. That's interesting. That's really interesting. Other things from people here or away. Ritoku, please.
Not long after I was ordained, a friend of mine, as a gift, not realizing that there's different kinds of Buddhism, gave me a begging bowl from the Theravadan tradition. And it's pretty good size, and it has a lid. And in their tradition, you know, you have to eat before noon, and you go out in the morning and you beg for whatever, which in the Theravadan cultures, you know, there's not much begging going on. You just walk up to the door and hold out your bowl, and they throw stuff in it, right? I mean, there's no picking and choosing there for sure. You get whatever they give you, and it may not be what you like. It may not even be vegetarian. You know, whatever goes in that bowl, you have to eat, and it's a good sized bowl. And then you're done by the end of the day, before noon. You have to wait until the next morning for anything else. No midnight snacks. So I got this bowl, it's a pretty good sized one. I don't have much use for it, so I flipped it upside down and put a Buddha statue on it. So it makes for a nice altar.
There you go.
But I'm kind of wondering, I mean, that's the Theravada way of doing it, but I've also spent time as a visitor in Tibetan and Chinese monastery, and they don't have anything that resembles what we do. I mean, when it's mealtime, it's just mealtime, and they don't seem to be very formal or ritual about it. And I remember you talking about how this is like an 800-year tradition, but you know, 800 years is not the whole tradition or history of Buddhism. In fact, that's just a fragment. That we have this very long-term Japanese tradition. Where did it come from?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I've not dug into that, and now I will. The fact that Dogen describes in quite a detailed way this food practice means, you know, I'm pretty sure he didn't make it up. Maybe he did. Maybe Toto-san knows. It is not part of the sort of 250-year-old reset where we didn't know what Kinhin was like before that, and something kind of got constructed. You know, he was talking about doing. If you read Fushkanpo, I mean, looks very much like what we do today. So somehow this was going on. I don't know how that transition happened from China to Japan. If anyone here knows, please speak up. That would be interesting to look into. So I was unaware that if you go to a temple in China, they just put out food and people eat?
Basically, yeah.
Is there any chanting or anything?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I wasn't there as a monk, I was just there as an observer.
I see. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. You've stumped the band. But let's dig around and see if we can find out.
I mean, the Tibetans have chants, but they have chants for everything.
Yeah, well.
I didn't even have a chance to go into the bathroom.
So do we.
There you go.
We
got that in common.
We also have got this for everything, and if anyone's interested in that, you can look at my I Vow column on Dogen Institute, where I take one of those gathas every time. There's 140 of them in the Avatamsaka Sutra. It will take me a long time to get through. There's a chant for everything.
Well, we should post it in the bathroom.
We can. Well, so the one in the large bathroom,
I did see that. That's a nice one.
that's my mixed media piece. So I'm gonna blow my horn. Okay, other things from people regarding meals, eating, anything we've talked about today? Clark, please.
It may be obvious, I'm just thinking to myself, it's not important what we do. It's our motivation for doing it. So,
I think it's also important what we do, but what we need to not lose sight of the motivation, right? Because what we do creates karma. So what we do with this body, speech, and mind starts with thinking. What are we saying? How are we acting on it, right? So what we do in the world is important, but we need to not forget the motivation. We need to be skillful both ways. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did I see a hand go up someplace? Maybe at home? Are we good for today? Anything else? Final remarks, reflections, questions? All right, let's practice eating when we move into tea time. All right? Thanks, everybody.